Hello, Avery, and welcome to Grandma's Story Room again. We are ready to read out of Little House in the Big Woods again. And when we left off last time, we found out that Pa owned a pig that ran wild in the big woods. It lived on acorns and nuts and roots. Now he caught it and he put it in a pen made of logs to fatten him up. He would butcher it as soon as the weather was cold enough to keep the pork frozen. You see, in those days they kept animals not for pets, but they kept them for food. And so this pig would provide bacon and ham and pork chops for the family during the winter time. Once in the middle of the night, Laura woke up and she heard the pig squealing. Pa jumped out of bed, snatched his gun from the wall, and ran outdoors. Then Laura heard the gun go off once, twice. When Pa came back, he told her what had happened. He had seen a big black bear standing beside the pig pen. The bear was reaching into the pen to grab the pig, and the pig was running and squealing. Pa saw this in the starlight, and he fired quickly, but the light was dim, and in his haste, he missed the bear. The bear ran away into the woods, not hurt at all. Now, Laura was sorry that Pa did not get the bear. She liked the taste of bear meat so much. And Pa was sorry too, but he said, "Well, anyway, I saved the bacon." I guess he was trying to make a joke. The garden behind the little house had been growing all summer. It was so near the house that the deer did not jump the fence and eat the vegetables in the daytime, and at night Jack kept them away. But sometimes in the mornings there were little hoof prints among the carrots and the cabbages. But Jack's tracks were there too, and the deer had jumped right out again. Now the potatoes and the carrots and the beets and turnips and cabbages were all gathered, and they were stored in the cellar for the freezing nights to come. Onions were made onto long ropes, braided together by their tops, and they were hung in the attic beside wreaths of red peppers strung on threads. The pumpkins and the squashes were piled in yellow and green and orange, yellow, green heaps in the attic's corners. Now we have to think about this for a minute. The attic is used to store all those vegetables. It's also used to store all the dried deer meat, but it's also the place where Laura and her sisters sleep. So they have to share their bedroom with all those things. The barrels of salted fish were in the pantry, and yellow cheeses were stacked on the pantry shelves. And then one day, Uncle Henry came riding out of the big woods. He had come to help Pa butcher. Ma's big butcher knife was already sharpened, and Uncle Henry had brought Aunt Polly's butcher knife. And near the pig pen, Pa and Uncle Henry built a bonfire. That's a big fire. And they heated a great kettle of water over it. And when the water was boiling, they went to kill the hog. Then Laura ran and she hid her head on the bed and she stopped up her ears with her fingers so she could not hear the hog squeal. "It doesn't hurt him, Laura," Pa said. "We do it so quickly." But she didn't want to hear him squeal. And in a minute she took one finger cautiously out of her ear and she listened. and the hog had stopped squealing. And after that, butchering time was great fun. It was such a busy day, with so much to see and do. Uncle Henry and Pa were jolly, and there would be spare ribs for dinner, and Pa had promised Laura and Mary the bladder and the pig's tail. As soon as the hog was dead, Pa and Uncle Henry lifted it up and down in the boiling water until it was well scalded. And then they laid it on a board and they scraped the skin off with their knives. And then all the bristles came off. And after that, they hung the hog in the tree. You remember why they hung it in the tree? So the animals on the ground couldn't get it. And they took out the insides and left it hanging to cool. And when it was cool, they took it down and they cut it up. And there were hams and shoulders and side meat and spare ribs and belly. There was the heart and the liver and even the tongue and the head to be made into head cheese, and a dishpan full of bits to be made into sausage. The meat was laid on a board in the back door shed, and every piece was sprinkled with salt. The hams and the shoulders were put to pickle in brine, for they would be smoked like the venison in the hollow log. You can't beat hickory cured ham, Pa said. And he was blowing up the bladder. Now, the bladder is the organ in your body that holds your pee. Now, most of us would not think about eating the bladder or even playing with it. But you have to remember, in those days, those kids didn't have much to play with. And the bladder was going to provide great fun. So Pa was blowing up the bladder. It made a little white balloon, and he tied the end tight with a string and gave it to Mary and Laura to play with. And they could throw it into the air and spat it back and forth with their hands. There they are, playing with what looks like a balloon, but it's really the bladder of the pig that's been blown up. Or it would bounce along the ground, and they could kick it like a ball. Or even better fun than a balloon was the pig's tail. Pa skinned it for them carefully, and into the large end he thrust a sharpened stick. Ma opened the front of the cook stove and raked hot coals out into the iron hearth. Then Laura and Mary took turns holding the pig's tail over the coals, kind of like what you would do with a marshmallow. It sizzled and it fried and it popped, and drops of fat dripped off of it and blazed on the coals. And then Ma sprinkled it with salt, and their hands and their faces got very hot. And Laura burned her finger, but she was so excited she didn't care. Roasting the pig's tail was such fun, it was hard to play fair, taking turns. And at last it was done. It was nicely browned all over, and oh, how good it smelled. They carried it into the yard to cool it, and even before it was cool enough, they began tasting it and burning their tongues. And they ate every little bit of meat off the bones. And then they gave the bones to Jack. And that was the end of the pig's tail. There would not be another one until next year. Uncle Henry went home after dinner, and Pa went away to his work in the big woods. But for Laura and Mary and Ma, butchering time had only begun. It was a great deal for Ma to do, and Laura and Mary helped her. All that day and the next, Ma was trying out the lard. Lard is fat, animal fat, in big iron pots on the cook stove. And Laura and Mary carried wood, and they watched the fire. It must be hot, but not too hot, or the lard would burn. The big pots simmered and boiled, but they must not smoke. From time to time, Ma skimmed out the brown cracklings. She put them in a cloth and squeezed out every bit of the lard, and then she put the cracklings away. And she would use them to flavor Johnny cake later. Now, I'm thinking Johnny cake might be like a pancake. Cracklings were very good to eat, but Laurie and Mary could only have a little taste because they were too rich for little girls, Ma said. So Ma scraped and she cleaned the head of the pig carefully. And then she boiled it until all the meat fell off the bones. And then she chopped the meat fine with her chopping knife in the wooden bowl. And she seasoned it with pepper and salt and spices. Then she mixed the pot liquor with it and set it away in a pan to cool. And when it was cool, it would be cut in slices, and that was head cheese. Not something we are likely to eat today. The little pieces of meat, lean and fat, that had been cut off the large pieces, Ma chopped and chopped until it was all chopped fine. And she seasoned it with salt and pepper and with dried sage leaves from their garden. And then with her hands, she tossed and turned it until it was well mixed, and she molded it into little balls, and she put the balls in a pan out in the shed where they would freeze and be good to eat all winter. And that was the sausage. When butchering time was over, there were the sausages and the head cheese, the big jars of lard, and the keg of white salt pork out in the shed. And in the attic, where the girls slept, hung the smoked hams and shoulders. And the little house was fairly bustling with good food stored away for the long winter. And the pantry and the shed and the cellar were full, and so was the attic. And that's where we will stop. One of the things I think that's so interesting about this story is to learn about the lives of children and their families before we had refrigerators and before we had grocery stores and all the conveniences that we have today. And as you listen to these stories, you will hear that Laura and Mary worked right alongside their Ma all day long. So we will continue our story next time. I'm glad you came to Grandma's Story Room, and I love you. Until next time.